Good day, class, and welcome to Module 2 of our History 566 class, The Rise of Adolf Hitler and Fascism in Nazi Germany. In this week's module, we're going to be looking a little bit at Karl Lueger and George von Schoner and their influence on Hitler. This video in particular should help you with your book review of I Decide Who is a Jew, The Papers of Dr. Karl Lueger by Richard S. Gere. And this video presentation is on Dr. Karl Lueger and the power of persuasion. So Karl Lueger was an Austrian politician back in the late 1800s that had an influence on Adolf Hitler. He had an anti-Semitic political strategy for the Austrian Christian Social Party that influenced Adolf Hitler's pan-German political strategy for promoting anti-Semitism by controlling the masses through available media. So these atrocities that were committed in Nazi Germany had their roots earlier. And many of us or all of us know the atrocities performed during the Holocaust, and those have been well documented and studied. However, when we're taking a look at what preceded those atrocities and how Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime came up with those atrocities from a form of pan-German nationalism is some of the things that we'll talk a little bit about here. So Hitler spent some time in his early years in Vienna, Austria, and he looked at the strategies and politics of the various politicians and political parties. And Karl Lueger of the Austrian Christian Social Party was one of the politicians that was instrumental in providing a framework for how Hitler would implement his anti-Semitic strategies that he would espouse as the leader of Nazi Germany. So to understand Hitler's views and in formulating his anti-Semitic strategy, it's important to explore his experiences during his time in Vienna. So looking back at how Lueger was able to control the masses and the messaging he used by the available media that he had helps give us insight into how Hitler was able to perpetuate that pan-German political strategy and using anti-Semitism as part of that. So Karl Lueger, in many of his speeches, he blames the Jews for a number of the problems in Vienna. So in a speech that he presented in Moravia in 1891, he pointed out that the Vienna press was primarily run by the Jews, and he focused on events that were useful or harmful to that segment of the population. One of his statements was, "I shall limit my comments and simply say that the liberal press, sometimes also called Jewish liberal or Jewish press, is the most impudent press on this earth, that it was and is the ally and accomplice of all robberies and thefts that have been committed against the Christian people." In another speech he gave in 1886, he pointed out the goal of liberating Christians by discrediting big business. And he went on further by mentioning that big business was controlled by the Jews. Lueger's statement was, while the power of unity was not recognized by all in the Christian camp, the Liberal Party has immediately appreciated the magnitude of the danger of having to fight against a united army rather than against individual divisions that often enough fought one another. A united army whose only goal, even if their weapons are different, is liberation of the Christian people and states from the discreditable rule of the power that we Democrats call big business and the anti-Semites called Jewry. So there were a couple of writers that connected Lueger as a role model for Hitler, and Hitler even mentions it in Mein Kampf. We'll get to that in a moment. So Peter Pulitzer is one of the writers you may want to take a look at. His journal article, Third Thoughts on German and Austrian Anti-Semitism, he points out the effects of the anti-Semitic speeches of Karl Lueger, and that the Nazis or the National Socialists became the beneficiaries of this broad anti-Semitic consensus in the population. Pulitzer also, this paper was a little bit later than one he did 40 years earlier, concerning the outcomes of Treblinka and Auschwitz based on the progression from the anti-Semitic rhetoric of Lueger and other Austrian politicians to pan-Germanism to National Socialism, which includes Schörner as well, and you'll see that in the other video. Pulitzer concludes that Treblinka and Auschwitz would hardly have been possible without them and their fellow travelers. This has been said so many times that there is, I hope, no need to repeat it. Also, in Pulitzer's reflection of history of anti-Semitism in Austria and Germany, he points out that he should have paid more attention to the population's acceptance of the ideology around nationalism displayed by the more popular Völkisch organizations. Another interesting article is by Robert Wistrich that you should take a look at, and it's in our required readings, Karl Lueger and the Ambiguities of Viennese Anti-Semitism. Wistrich maintains that the pre-1914 Christian social movement cemented the hatred of both the socialists and the Jews in Austria, and we see this reflected in National Socialism or the Nazi movement. Wistrich concludes the point that motives of economic competition, professional jealousy, anti-intellectualism, fear of proletarization, the struggle for scarce resources, and a fierce conflict over secularism and religious education all played their part in animating this conflict. By 1914, it had become a staple diet of Austrian public life. So Wistrich further explores Lueger's anti-Semitism as well as his pro-Catholic stance, pointing out that Lueger exploited both ideologies during his lifetime to promote his political career. The interesting thing is Lueger's rhetoric was focused on theatrics, oratory, and popular messaging for the masses, which is very similar to Hitler. The difference was Lueger did not take action against the Jews. In fact, Wistrich points out that there was no seizure of Jewish wealth, and that even Lueger frequently consulted with Jewish businessmen concerning his ambitious municipal programs. So you have to keep in mind that Lueger promoted an anti-Semitic viewpoint. However, he collaborated frequently with Jewish businessmen, Jewish people that were wealthy. And in fact, that's part of the point of the required reading you have this week, where Lueger famously stated, "I decide who is a Jew." Another interesting article that you should take a look at is In the Shadow of Dr. Lueger, Vienna Notes of an Accidental Tourist by Andrei Zemenemsky. He maintains that Lueger was a prototypical populist politician that we would see in the 20th century, and that Lueger passionately fought for the little people and mastered the arts of making propaganda, courting nationalism, and promoting the public welfare in everything that he did. The interesting thing was that Hitler learned from Lueger was an understanding of how to handle messaging propaganda, especially around religion, nationalism, and socialism. And what we see with Lueger is, as well as Hitler, is it provided enormous political power with the masses during both their political careers. And these lessons from Lueger, he incorporated into the doctrine of National Socialism. Hitler took it a step further, obviously. He was probably more along the lines of Schörner as far as his disdain for the Jews and how he ultimately treated them. Zemenemsky maintained that Lueger, as well as the early 20th century populists, provided the foundation for the three major ideological trends of the century, which were socialism, communism, National Socialism, fascism, and the welfare state, or Keynesianism. Now, as far as Hitler's view of Karl Lueger, in Mein Kampf, Hitler spends a little bit of time talking about his time in Vienna and talking about Schörner and Lueger. And in Hitler's own words, he considered Lueger to be the greatest German mayor of all times. The interesting thing, though, from Hitler's perspective, is he also pointed out that Lueger had political virtues and failings as well. So the virtues included the ability to promote a nationalistic pan-German passion among the masses, with the correct use of propaganda, establishing a common enemy to struggling citizens by promoting anti-Semitism, which he did, as the cause of their problems, so giving the masses an enemy. And he focused on messaging to the middle-class masses with a priority of winning over the Catholic Church clergy, which is a very interesting dynamic that also happened in Nazi Germany. As far as the failings that Hitler mentioned, the failings included a clear understanding of the social problem, which he says Lueger did, but he did not follow through with action to maintain momentum of the masses. Also understanding that the times were already desperate by the rise of the pan-German movement, and the lack of action to engage the masses was a problem from Hitler's perspective. And also facing the fact that political parties attracted parliamentarians versus fighters and leaders. And Hitler was very deliberate in how he selected fighters and leaders in Nazi Germany. So those were lessons that he learned, that he applied to his vision of a totalitarian Nazi Germany. So in closing, just a few comments about the anti-Semitic propaganda. We see this throughout in Nazi Germany, and you're going to see this somewhat in how Hitler controlled the propaganda with, for instance, Streicher's Der Stürmer, and some of the propaganda speeches that Hitler had. So Karl Lueger's use of religion to influence the masses during his time as a leader of the Austrian Christian Social Party was one of these things that Hitler made sure that he took advantage of. So the other use of media that we see includes speeches, art, youth education, newspaper, film, other media. You know, the films of Riefenstahl that were promoted, The Triumph of the Will. We see those types of things in not only the public speaking, but the different medias that Hitler used, and he learned those things from Karl Lueger. In closing, I hope that all of you are having a wonderful week in class, and if you have any questions about any of this, please give me a call, send me an email, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you. I hope everyone has a great week. God bless.